Judge Thompson exhaled, a near-silent puff lost in the drone of the fluorescent lights that bleached his chambers. Case File 37B, Maxwell Custody. He lifted the weighty document, its drab cover reflecting the tedium that threatened to engulf him. Another parental battlefield, with a child caught in the crossfire. He leafed through the contents: legal arguments, sworn statements, financial disclosures, psychological assessments. Each page pulsed with antagonism, the ink practically seething with the parents' loathing. Mark Maxwell and Veronica Carter. A name sparked recognition. Veronica Carter, wasn't she the legal wunderkind from Goldman Sachs? The one who'd snagged a partnership before turning 30? He recalled a magazine spread showcasing her, all sharp features and unwavering self-assurance. He slumped back against his aged leather chair, its springs emitting a mournful groan. Family law. It wasn't the grand stage he'd envisioned when he first accepted the judgeship, dreaming of precedent-setting rulings and shaping jurisprudence. Instead, he was mired in the trenches of warring exes, tearful children, and enough scandalous secrets to stock a tabloid. Still, it paid the bills, and occasionally, a case would emerge that rekindled his initial fervor, the chance to truly impact a young life. He took a swallow of tepid coffee, its acrid tang failing to banish the weariness. The file detailed a highly contentious situation, rife with accusations of parental alienation, emotional manipulation, and even hints of neglect. These were the cases he dreaded, where parental spite overshadowed the well-being of the child caught in the middle. A glance at the clock. 10 minutes until the hearing. He hoped, against hope, that they could manage a modicum of civility, for their son's sake. Leo. He lifted a photograph clipped to the inner cover. A boy with unerringly perceptive eyes stared back. Something about that gaze, a premature knowingness, gave Judge Thompson pause. He seemed to possess a wisdom beyond his 4 years. A depth that belied his tender age. He dismissed the thought with a mental shake. Likely just exhaustion playing tricks on him. He rose, adjusting his robes. Time to face the music. The courtroom thrummed with anticipation upon his entrance. The air hung thick with conflict, practically solid. He ascended the bench, the solid feel of the gavel anchoring him. He nodded to the court clerk, Sarah, whose perpetual cheerfulness seemed a defiant act against the grim nature of their work. Docket 37B, Maxwell vs. Maxwell, Sarah announced, her voice ringing with practiced clarity. 2 attorneys instantly surged to their feet, vying for his attention. He recognized Veronica Carter's counsel, a woman sculpted in sleek lines and impeccable tailoring, exuding practiced poise. Mark Maxwell's lawyer was equally polished, yet possessed a slightly more disheveled, approachable aura. He loathed these displays of legal maneuvering. "Good morning, counsel," Judge Thompson intoned, his voice resonating throughout the room. "Please state your appearances for the record." The lawyers introduced themselves, their words dripping with rehearsed formality. He observed Veronica Carter seated at the plaintiff's table, her spine rigidly erect, her features tight. She appeared even more formidable in person, her blonde hair drawn into a severe knot, her tailored suit projecting an aura of unyielding power. Beside her sat a small figure, almost swallowed by the chair. Leo. He was even smaller than he'd pictured, his eyes flitting around the chamber, absorbing every detail. Across the aisle, Mark Maxwell sat hunched and ill at ease, his gaze frequently drawn to Leo, his face etched with concern. The disparity between the parents was palpable. "Your Honor," Veronica's lawyer began, her voice as smooth as polished stone. "We are petitioning for a modification of the existing custody arrangement. Ms. Carter believes that the current situation is detrimental to her son, Leo." Mark's lawyer immediately countered, launching into an elaborate defense of Mark's paternal virtues. Judge Thompson tuned out the rhetoric, focusing on Leo. The boy remained motionless, silent. He simply observed, like a budding scientist scrutinizing a particularly perplexing specimen. The attorney's arguments intensified, the veneer of civility fracturing to reveal the festering resentment beneath. Accusations flew like poisoned darts, each parent portraying the other as an inept, uncaring ogre. Judge Thompson suppressed a sigh. This was precisely what he dreaded. He's failing to nurture his intellectual potential, Veronica's lawyer declared, her voice laced with indignation. Leo possesses exceptional cognitive gifts, and Mr. Maxwell is failing to provide him with the necessary intellectual nourishment. That's preposterous, Mark's lawyer retorted. Mark is a devoted and involved parent. He dedicates substantial time to Leo, takes him to recreational activities, shares stories. Children's stories are hardly a substitute for genuine learning experiences, Veronica's lawyer snapped. Judge Thompson slammed his gavel, the sharp report echoing through the courtroom. Counsel, enough! This is not a forum for personal attacks. I expect a higher standard of professional conduct. The lawyers begrudgingly quieted, but the atmosphere remained charged. He observed Veronica, her face flushed with anger. He recognized the determination in her gaze, the fierce maternal instincts she harbored for her son. Yet he also detected a certain myopia. She was so fixated on Leo's intellectual advancement, on ensuring he secured every advantage, that she seemed to be missing something essential. He shifted his attention to Mark, whose features were etched with weary defeat. He clearly cared deeply for his son, but seemed outmatched, overwhelmed by Veronica's relentless drive. Ms. Carter, Judge Thompson stated, his voice measured but firm. You assert that Mr. Maxwell is neglecting Leo's intellectual development. Could you elaborate? Veronica leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with intensity. Leo's cognitive abilities place him in the gifted range, Your Honor. He's reading at a third-grade level. He dabbles in advanced mathematics for amusement. He requires stimulation, intellectual challenges. Mark merely allows him to passively consume television programs. Judge Thompson arched an eyebrow. Calculus at 4? He glanced at Leo, who was now meeting his gaze directly, his expression enigmatic. Mr. Maxwell, he said, turning to Mark. How do you respond to these claims? Mark shifted uncomfortably. I'm doing the best I can, Your Honor. Leo is unique. He learns at an accelerated pace. I'm not a prodigy, all right? I can't always keep up. I ensure he's well fed, properly clothed, and receives affection. Isn't that adequate? Judge Thompson felt a surge of empathy for Mark. He was clearly out of his depth. He looked back at Leo, the boy's unwavering stare. He suspected this case was far more intricate than it initially appeared. He cleared his throat. I believe a brief recess is in order, he announced. I wish to confer with Leo in my chambers. Veronica's lawyer immediately protested. With all due respect, Your Honor, I object to the private interrogation of a minor without legal representation. I understand your concerns, Ms. Davies, Judge Thompson replied. However, I believe it's imperative to ascertain Leo's perspective. Rest assured, I will be sensitive to his age and emotional state. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom. This matter centers on Leo's best interests. And sometimes that requires a degree of flexibility. He rose, his robes billowing around him. We will reconvene in 1 hour. He addressed Leo directly. Come with me, son. Leo detached himself from his seat and approached the bench, extending his small hand. Judge Thompson grasped it, surprised by the firmness of his grip. As they walked toward his chambers, he couldn't dispel the sensation that he was entering unfamiliar territory. This wasn't simply another custody dispute. This was fundamentally different. In some way, extraordinary. The quiet observer. The hearing room pressed in, a palpable tension stifling the air. Veronica Carter, a figure of composed severity in her gray suit, sat rigid in the witness chair, her gaze laser-focused on Mr. Abernathy, whose professional smile lacked genuine warmth. Ms. Carter. Abernathy's voice, a well-oiled machine, resonated in the closed space. Could you outline your current role? I'm a senior vice president at Global Tech Solutions, she stated, her tone ringing with assuredness. My responsibilities encompass the strategy and execution of growth initiatives across pivotal departments. A cascade of acronyms and corporate jargon followed, likely lost on everyone save perhaps Leo, who remained a study in stillness beside his father, his attention riveted on his mother. Judge Thompson, observing from his elevated position, found his attention divided between Ronnie's testimony and the unnervingly calm boy. Leo hadn't twitched, hadn't doodled, hadn't even whispered. He simply observed, his dark eyes drinking everything in. Such unwavering focus was unsettling for one so young, especially amidst the tedium of legal arguments. "And would you describe your career as demanding, Ms. Carter?" Abernathy queried, navigating the narrative they had carefully constructed. "Indeed," Ronnie conceded, adding quickly, "However, I prioritize effective time management. I have always thrived on challenge, Your Honor. I believe in setting ambitious targets and exceeding them. This is how I secure Leo's future, ensuring he has access to every opportunity." Abernathy offered a curt nod of approval. "And does Mr. Maxwell, in your assessment, share this drive?" A fleeting hesitation, almost invisible, flickered across Ronnie's face, but not past Judge Thompson. "Mark is a decent man," she replied cautiously. "But he's never been particularly driven professionally. He's always been content with less than his potential." Beside Leo, Mark shifted uncomfortably. His attorney, Ms. Evans, a woman whose brow was perpetually etched with concern and whose spirit was as tenacious as a badger, scribbled furiously on her notepad. Abernathy homed in on the statement. "Content with less in what regard?" "Meaning he fails to prioritize Leo's success as I do," Ronnie declared, her voice gaining an edge. "He's content to let him be engrossed in video games. He doesn't inspire him to excel, to realize his capabilities." The judge formed a steeple with his fingers as his glance drifted back to Leo. The boy's face remained an unreadable mask, an impassive statue in miniature. Was he even grasping the weight of his mother's words? "Ms. Carter, to reiterate, you claim Mr. Maxwell neglects Leo's future. Can you cite specific instances?" Abernathy pressed. Ronnie launched into a detailed recitation of missed school deadlines, overlooked medical appointments, and evenings devoted to cartoons rather than developmental activities. The parade of perceived parental failings portrayed Mark as a well-meaning but ultimately inept guardian. Ms. Evans rose to her feet, her voice a stark counterpoint to Abernathy's polished tones, raw and direct. "Ms. Carter, you are a senior vice president at Global Tech Solutions. What are your typical working hours?" Ronnie showed a slight hint of irritation. "That depends on the project. Generally, I'm at my desk by 7 and rarely leave before 7 or 8. So, a 12-hour workday is common?" Ms. Evans clarified, a subtle note of skepticism in her tone. "Sometimes longer," Ronnie admitted, her glance darting towards Leo. "And how frequently do you travel?" "Ms. Evans continued. "Several times monthly," Ronnie answered. "At times just a few days, at other times a week or more. So, to be clear, Ms. Carter, you work extensive hours and are frequently out of town. How much actual time do you spend with Leo on a typical weekday?" Ms. Evans' questions sliced through the air. Ronnie paused again, this time with even more deliberation. "I ensure the time we share is of value," she stated defensively. "We connect, we read. I fulfill his needs. Everything he requires, or everything you deem necessary, Ms. Carter?" Ms. Evans countered, her voice gaining volume. "Are those needs dictated by his preferences, or your own ambitions?" "Objection, Your Honor," Abernathy protested. "Counsel is harassing the witness." "Sustained," Judge Thompson ruled, but his attention remained locked on Leo. A flicker of awareness, a subtle shift, betrayed that Leo had noticed Ms. Evans. It wasn't outright approval, but some form of recognition. Ms. Evans reformed her line of questioning. "Ms. Carter, can you tell us what Leo's favorite book is?" Ronnie faltered, a shadow of uncertainty clouding her face. "He enjoys many books," she answered vaguely. "We read extensively together. Specifically, Ms. Carter, what is his top choice?" Ms. Evans continued to badger. Ronnie's carefully constructed composure began to crumble. "I can't recall the exact title right now," she stammered. Ms. Evans seized the opportunity. "And what about his favorite subject in school?" Are you aware of that, Ms. Carter? Ronnie's response was nearly inaudible. Math, I believe. Is that your official answer? Ms. Evans pressed. Ronnie, defeated, managed a quiet yes. Ms. Evans turned towards Judge Thompson. That concludes my questions, Your Honor. As Ronnie left the stand, her poise visibly shattered, Judge Thompson observed Leo's eyes following her. There was no judgment, no anger, no hurt. Only observation. It was as if he were cataloging her, dissecting her, storing her away within some vast, inner world. The proceedings continued with Mark's testimony, a man whose presence served as a counterpoint to his ex-wife. He lacked her polish, her articulation, but possessed a clear, unwavering authenticity. He spoke of Lego sessions, biking lessons, patiently explaining the solar system, constructing a loving, though imperfect, portrait of their home. Still, it was Leo who occupied Judge Thompson's thoughts. The boy was a puzzle, a hushed, watchful presence who seemed to drain the energy of the room into himself, a miniature sponge. He was more than a child caught between warring parents. He was something different. Something the judge struggled to define but knew he needed to understand. He mused, I wonder if he is fond of puzzles. Truth or lie, an unlikely game. Recess, Judge Thompson announced, the gavel's tap echoing softly in the suddenly still courtroom. He looked directly at Leo, his gaze gentle. Come on, sport. How about a trip to my chambers? I think we could all use a little breather. Ronnie's carefully sculpted expression faltered, a flicker of something akin to panic crossing her face. Mark, however, simply nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Leo's shoulder. That all right with you, son? Mark asked, his voice low. Leo considered the offer, his dark eyes, usually so still, flickered with a brief, unreadable emotion. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Judge Thompson rose, his robes rustling as he moved. Excellent. Let's stretch our legs. He gestured towards a side door, and Mark, after giving Ronnie a brief, unreadable look, guided Leo towards it. The judge's chambers were surprisingly homey. Stacks of law books lined the walls, but interspersed among them were photographs of his grandchildren, a whimsical paperweight shaped like a bulldog, and a half-eaten box of jelly donuts on his desk. The air smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and lemon polish. Make yourselves comfortable, Judge Thompson said, gesturing towards a worn leather couch. He rounded his desk, his movements slower than they had been that morning. Mark, can I offer you some coffee? Or maybe a donut? Coffee would be great, Judge. Thanks, Mark said, settling onto the couch beside Leo, who remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. Thompson poured 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to Mark. He then knelt in front of Leo, bringing himself eye to eye with the boy. Leo, he began, his voice soft. This whole process can be, well, it can be a lot. For everyone. I thought maybe we could do something a little different for a few minutes, take our minds off things. Leo tilted his head slightly, his expression still unreadable. How about a game? Judge Thompson continued, a small smile playing on his lips. It's called truth or lie. Simple rules. I say something, and you tell me if it's true or false. Okay? Leo's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Okay, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Great! Judge Thompson clapped his hands together, then winced slightly, as if the sound had been too loud. All right, let's start easy. You like dinosaurs? Leo hesitated for a beat. True, he finally said. Excellent. See? Easy peasy, Thompson said, relieved. Okay, next one. You like broccoli? Leo wrinkled his nose. Lie, he stated flatly. Mark chuckled softly from the couch. He's got you there, Judge. Kid's got good taste. Judge Thompson grinned. All right. My turn. You like going to school? Leo's gaze darted towards his father, then back to the judge. A flicker of something unidentifiable crossed his face. True, he said, but this time, his voice lacked conviction. Judge Thompson frowned, sensing something amiss. he decided to try a different tactic. Okay, this time it's your turn to ask me. Ask me anything, and I have to tell you the truth, or a lie. Leo stared at the judge, his brow furrowed in concentration. He seemed to be weighing his options, considering the possibilities. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, filled only with the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Finally, Leo spoke, his voice surprisingly clear and steady. Do you think that I am happy? The question hung in the air, stark and unexpected. Judge Thompson felt a pang of something akin to guilt. He had intended this game to be a light-hearted distraction, a way to connect with the child. But Leo, with his unnerving perception, had cut straight to the heart of the matter. Thompson hesitated, searching for the right words. He couldn't lie to the boy, not after inviting this level of vulnerability. But he also couldn't voice his honest assessment, not without potentially influencing the proceedings. That's a very insightful question, Leo, he said carefully. And it's one that I think you're the only one who can truly answer. Leo studied the judge's face, his gaze intense and unwavering. He seemed to be searching for some hidden meaning, some unspoken truth. Finally, he nodded slowly, as if accepting the judge's non-answer. Okay, he said quietly. The silence returned, heavier this time, charged with unspoken anxieties and uncertainties. Judge Thompson stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, a weight settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just another case, another custody battle. This was about a child's well-being, a child who was far more perceptive, far more complex than anyone seemed to realize. He turned back to face Leo, a newfound determination hardening his features. All right, sport, he said, forcing a lighter tone. My turn again. You like jelly donuts? Leo looked at the half-eaten box on the desk, then back at the judge. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. True, he said. Judge Thompson smiled back, relieved. For a moment, the tension seemed to ease, replaced by a fragile sense of normalcy. But he knew deep down that the game was far from over, and that Leo held the key to unlocking a truth that no one else could see. The toy agreement. All right, Leo, Judge Thompson said, leaning back in his leather chair. The air in the chambers, thick with unspoken anxieties just moments before, now held a fragile sense of curiosity. Truth or lie, remember? My turn. What's your favorite toy? Leo considered the question with an intensity that seemed far too grave for a child of his age. His brow furrowed, and he tapped a finger against his chin, the gesture a miniature imitation of the lawyers he'd observed in court. Mark watched his son, a familiar blend of pride and bewilderment on his face. Ronnie simply looked amused, a tiny smile playing on her lips. Favorite, Leo began, his voice small but clear, is a difficult metric to quantify. Are we speaking in terms of emotional attachment? Practical utility? Or perhaps... He paused, his eyes gleaming with an almost unnerving intelligence. Market value? Judge Thompson blinked. He'd expected a teddy bear, a race car, maybe even a superhero action figure. He hadn't anticipated a philosophical debate on the nature of favorite. He chuckled softly, trying to regain his footing. Let's go with emotional attachment, Leo. What toy makes you happiest? Leo nodded, seemingly satisfied with the clarified parameter. In that case, he said, it would likely be the limited edition, die-cast replica of the 1962 Aston Martin DB5. Ah, Judge Thompson said, feigning understanding. A classic. Very good taste. He had absolutely no idea what Leo was talking about. And what is it about this Aston Martin that you find so appealing? Several factors, Leo replied, launching into an explanation with the precision of a seasoned collector. Firstly, the craftsmanship is exceptional. The level of detail in the miniature recreation of the chassis, the interior upholstery, and the replicated engine components is remarkable. Secondly, its limited edition status significantly increases its potential for future appreciation in value. Only 5,000 units were manufactured, making it a relatively scarce commodity. Judge Thompson felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't normal 4-year-old conversation. He glanced at Mark, who shrugged helplessly, a mixture of amusement and utter confusion etched on his face. Ronnie, however, was scribbling furiously in her notepad, her eyes wide with fascination. But beyond the craftsmanship and the potential value, Leo continued, oblivious to the reactions he was provoking. There's also the issue of intellectual property. Judge Thompson nearly choked. Intellectual property? He repeated, his voice a strained whisper. Yes, Leo confirmed, nodding sagely. The Aston Martin DB5 design is protected by copyright and trademark laws. The manufacturers of the die-cast replica, in order to legally produce and sell the toy, would have had to enter into a licensing agreement with Aston Martin Lagonda Limited, the rights holder. He paused, taking a deep breath. This agreement would outline the specific terms and conditions under which the replica could be produced, including royalty payments owed to Aston Martin. Furthermore, the packaging and marketing materials for the toy would also need to comply with intellectual property regulations to avoid any potential infringement issues. The judge stared at Leo, speechless. The room was silent except for the quiet scratching of Ronnie's pen. He presided over countless cases involving complex legal arguments, but he never encountered anything quite like this. This wasn't just intelligence. It was something else entirely. Something almost unsettling. So, Judge Thompson managed to say, his voice still a little shaky. You understand all of that? Leo tilted his head, his expression a mixture of confusion and mild irritation. Of course, he said. It's fairly basic. Mark coughed, breaking the stunned silence. Leo, he said gently, not all children know about licensing agreements. Leo frowned. But shouldn't they? It's important to understand the legal framework that governs the production and distribution of goods. Otherwise, how can they make informed purchasing decisions? Judge Thompson rubbed his temples. He felt a headache coming on. He thought he was doing something kind, something to alleviate the stress of the situation. Instead, he felt like he'd stumbled into a bizarre alternate reality. Well, Leo, the judge said, trying to steer the conversation back to something resembling normalcy. That's very impressive. Very impressive indeed. So you own this Aston Martin then? Yes, Leo confirmed. It was a gift. But ownership, he added, his voice taking on a more serious tone, also implies certain responsibilities. I am responsible for ensuring its proper care and maintenance, for protecting it from damage or theft, and for complying with any applicable regulations regarding its storage and display. Judge Thompson closed his eyes briefly. He needed a drink. A very strong drink. Right, he said, forcing a smile. Responsibilities. Of course. He took a deep breath. Okay, Leo, my turn again. Truth or lie, do you think this court case is fair? Leo's gaze intensified, and the judge braced himself. He had a feeling this answer would be far more complicated than a simple yes or no. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken tension. The game, intended as a harmless distraction, had taken a sharp and unexpected turn, revealing a depth of intellect and a peculiar understanding of the world that left Judge Thompson profoundly unsettled. He suddenly felt a weight of responsibility he hadn't anticipated, not just for the outcome of the case, but for the well-being of this extraordinary little boy. Disguised inquiries. All right, Leo, Judge Thompson commenced, leaning forward as the afternoon sunlight gilded the silver threads woven into his hair. A quandary for you. Is it equitable if one child receives a double portion of cookies while another gets nothing at all? Leo deliberated, his small brow knit with the effort of concentration. He tapped a diminutive finger against the armrest of his chair, a miniature throne dwarfed by the courtroom's austere benches. That depends, he declared at last, his voice a small bell ringing with clarity. The judge's eyebrow arched in query. On what, specifically? If the first one earned that treat. Or if the other had their share yesterday. Or perhaps the first shared earlier that day. He paused, adding with the self-assuredness of a seasoned advocate delivering summation. Context is paramount when assessing fairness. Thompson chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. Very good, Leo. Indeed. Now should the rules apply uniformly to everyone? This time, Leo's response was immediate. Affirmative. Equal protection under the law. 14th Amendment, United States Constitution. The judge nearly sputtered, taken aback. He cleared his throat, regaining composure with a visible effort. He hadn't framed the question as a legal one, yet Leo's reply was astonishingly precise. He shot a sidelong glance toward Ms. Davies, the court reporter, who diligently transcribed the exchange, her fingers a blur. He hoped his initial surprise hadn't been too obvious. And what does that entail, this equal protection? He inquired, striving for a tone of detached curiosity. Leo shifted in his seat, his gaze drifting momentarily towards the window. It signifies all individuals should be treated the same absent a valid rationale for differential treatment. And those grounds must be justifiable. He stumbled momentarily over the word justifiable, but quickly regained his footing. Thompson suppressed a smile. Asterisk justifiable grounds. Asterisk he was echoing the language of legal precedent, the very lexicon he employed in his own pronouncements. He resolved to probe further. Opposer, if an individual stands accused of wrongdoing, should they have an opportunity to present their version of events? Absolutely. Leo responded without a moment's hesitation. Due process. 5th Amendment. Everyone has the right to a defense. The judge steepled his fingers, the gesture suddenly feeling less commanding, more defensive. He was venturing into treacherous territory. He, a jurist bound by a stringent code, was essentially cross-examining a child of 4. Yet, an undeniable curiosity gripped him. He needed to ascertain the breadth of Leo's unusual erudition. One last question for the time being, Leo. Is it ever permissible to break a promise? He framed it as a moral quandary, hoping to sidestep further constitutional revelations. Leo pursed his lips, this query giving him evident pause. It's generally not right, he articulated slowly. Promises are the bedrock of trust. However, if honoring a pledge would inflict harm, then perhaps it hinges on what holds greater importance, the fidelity to the agreement or the potential injury. Thompson felt a swell of near reverence. The boy was wrestling with intricate ethical philosophy, weighing the sanctity of contract against the possibility of detriment. It was a challenge many a law student encountered. He cleared his throat. That's a profoundly thoughtful response, Leo. Thank you. He paused, attempting a casual tone. Where did you gain all this wisdom, champ? Leo shrugged, his diminutive shoulders barely stirring beneath his immaculate blue shirt. I read. You read? Thompson queried, struggling to conceal the incredulity in his voice. What sorts of things do you read? Books, Leo replied, as if articulating an obvious fact. And sometimes I watch the television. News broadcasts. And occasionally Mommy reads from her hefty tomes. Thompson resolved to confer with Mrs. Maxwell. He needed to understand the nature of the material the child was absorbing. He glanced at Ms. Davies, who continued to type, her expression inscrutable. He wondered at her interpretation of the scene unfolding. He decided to redirect the conversation, to steer away from the legal and philosophical realms. All right, Leo, how about we discuss something different? Tell me, what is your preferred animal? Leo's face lit up, the tension visibly receding. Penguins, he exclaimed immediately. They're incredibly efficient swimmers. And they practice monogamy. Well, mostly. It's not always the case, but under normal circumstances they do. Thompson smiled, relieved. Penguins. Finally, a subject befitting a 4-year-old. He spent the following minutes conversing with Leo about penguins, their habitats, their diets, their surprisingly elaborate social structures. He found himself genuinely engaged, momentarily shedding the burdens of the case, the pressure of the courtroom, the unnerving brilliance of the child before him. Yet, a disquieting feeling persisted. He couldn't dismiss the image of Leo reciting constitutional amendments, quoting legal principles with the fluency of a seasoned barrister. It was unnatural, unsettling. As the session neared its conclusion, Thompson escorted Leo to the door, placing a gentle hand upon his shoulder. "Thank you for participating today, Leo," he said. "You are a remarkably intelligent boy." Leo regarded him, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Judge Thompson," he replied quietly. As Leo departed, hand in hand with his mother, Thompson remained in the doorway, watching their retreat. He experienced a profound sense of obligation, a weight settling upon his shoulders. He was no longer solely a judge presiding over a custody dispute. He was a custodian of a singular and vulnerable mind, a mind that required protection, cultivation, and comprehension. He turned back toward the courtroom, its sterile ambience suddenly feeling colder, more oppressive. He had considerable work ahead. He needed to decipher Leo Maxwell, and above all, understand what truly served his best interests. The game of truth or lie had unveiled depths far beyond what he anticipated. It had revealed a truth poised to redefine everything. Google confirmation. Back in his chambers, silence pressed in on Judge Thompson, a palpable weight after the courtroom's pronouncements and hushed asides. He tugged at his tie, the silk suddenly constricting. His coffee sat untouched, tepid. Instead, his gaze drifted to the antique oak desk, his grandfather's legacy, a silent repository of legal battles and momentous choices. Today, however, it felt less like a fortress of justice and more like a stage for his own mounting confusion. He stalled, knowing procedure dictated a review of pending cases. But the image of Leo, dwarfed by the witness chair, brow knitted in concentration while discussing the Fifth Amendment's nuances, refused to fade. With a sigh that seemed to deflate him, he pivoted his chair towards the cold glow of his computer screen. A prickle of guilt, almost childish, accompanied the action. This wasn't strictly in line with judicial protocol. Judges relied on precedents and expert testimony, not search engines. Yet, an insistent curiosity propelled him forward. He typed, "Eminent domain Fifth Amendment just compensation," into the search bar. An avalanche of results poured forth: legal journals, Supreme Court decisions summarized, blogs dissecting the complexities. He chose a particularly dense article from the Yale Law Journal. As he scanned the text, Leo's arguments jumped off the page: the subtle distinctions between direct and indirect takings, the labyrinthine complexities of determining just compensation for intangible losses. Intangible losses, the boy had said, for God's sake. He leaned back, a low whistle escaping his lips. This wasn't mere mimicry. This was genuine comprehension. Next, hypothetical rational person standard tort law. Again, the internet complied, throwing up definitions of reasonable care and illustrations of the standard at work in negligence claims. He even unearthed a discussion of the concept's philosophical roots, citing John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. The very thinkers, he recalled with a start, Leo had casually referenced. He raked a hand through his thinning hair. Intelligence was one thing, even exceptional intelligence. But this degree of nuanced understanding, this command of abstract legal principles at the age of 4? Law students wrestled with such concepts. A growing unease settled over him, a chill crawling up his spine. Where had Leo acquired this knowledge? Who had been his instructor? And why? Was this a calculated maneuver to sway the court? Was a parent shaping him for some hidden agenda? The suspicion left a metallic taste in his mouth. He closed the browser, the screen reflecting back his own bewildered face. The implications were enormous. If Leo truly possessed this level of cognitive prowess, the entire custody case was upended. It wasn't simply about the better home or the more stable environment. It was about safeguarding a singular, almost vulnerable intellect, nurturing its potential. He checked the clock. The afternoon session loomed. He still hadn't cracked open those case files. Yet he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his core, that he couldn't approach this case as before. He couldn't solely rely on the lawyer's submissions, their curated evidence. He had a duty, a moral imperative, to understand Leo, to unravel the mystery of his mind, to ensure his judgment served the child's true interests. He stood, a renewed conviction sharpening his features. He needed an expert opinion, someone who could shed light on Leo's abilities. A child psychologist, perhaps? A specialist in exceptional children? He resolved to call his clerk. As he headed for the door, his reflections stared back from the polished surface of a bookcase. He saw not just a judge, but a man burdened by an unexpected responsibility, grappling with the unsettling notion that the laws he had sworn to uphold might fall short in protecting this extraordinary child who had stepped into his courtroom. The game of truth or lie had morphed, and he was now playing for stakes beyond his reckoning. He had to uncover the truth behind Leo's brilliance, before he could even begin to define what justice truly meant in this perplexing case. The conventional tools of the legal system, he feared, were about to prove insufficient. Flaws in the case. The courtroom air hung differently today, less antiseptic, perhaps because Judge Thompson no longer regarded the proceedings as just another file. He observed Mark Maxwell's approach to the witness stand, a palpable nervousness shimmering around him like heat off asphalt. Mark took the oath, his voice a mere thread of sound. "Mr. Maxwell." Ms. Davies, Ronnie's lawyer, opened, her voice a polished blade. "Could you elaborate on your dedication to fatherhood concerning Leo?" Mark puffed up, straightening his posture. "Absolutely. Leo is my son, and I cherish him. I want to guide him, be present, impart wisdom, everything a father embodies." He unfurled a vision of idyllic weekends, ball games, fishing expeditions, after-school tutoring. Judge Thompson listened, his gaze, however, strayed to Leo, seated placidly alongside his mother. A slight crease etched his brow, eyes riveted on his father. It wasn't the look of a child absorbing a heartfelt declaration, it was analytical. Mark pressed on, delineating how he'd secure the finest education, the choicest opportunities. "I desire for him a solid foundation, an affectionate setting, something I lacked during my own upbringing." Then, Judge Thompson caught it, a fleeting shadow in Leo's eyes, almost unnoticeable. A momentary tightening of his lips, followed by a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. Was the boy responding to a particular term? Some legal jargon? The judge filed the observation away. Ms. Davies granted Mark leeway to construct his narrative before striking. "Mr. Maxwell, you express a desire to provide a stable home. Isn't it accurate to state you've relocated 5 times in the past 3 years?" Mark faltered. "Well, yes, but those were transient situations. I'm settled now. I have a fixed address. A single-bedroom apartment, shared by 2 individuals?" Ms. Davies' tone dripped with doubt. "It's affordable," Mark mumbled. "And I am in the market for a better accommodation." Again, the nearly invisible head shake from Leo. This time, accompanied by a whisper of a sigh, so faint the judge almost missed it. What fault had the boy detected? The precariousness of Mark's living arrangements? A threat of financial instability? Ms. Davies sharpened her attack, cataloging Mark's spotty employment history, gambling debts, past transgressions. Though unspoken, the implications resonated. Mark's counsel, a younger man named Mr. Evans, objected, citing irrelevance. "Your Honor, these are relics of the past and bear no weight on Mr. Maxwell's current aptitude as a parent." "Relevance is debatable, Mr. Evans," Judge Thompson replied, his tone even. "Ms. Davies is attempting to craft a portrayal of Mr. Maxwell's character, which undoubtedly factors into the assessment of parental fitness." He permitted Ms. Davies to continue, urging brevity. Ms. Davies paraded forth evidence of a DUI 5 years prior, a rubber check from 2 years ago, and a restraining order, later rescinded, filed by a former partner. Each revelation eroded Mark's carefully constructed facade. With each disclosure, Judge Thompson tracked Leo. The boy's reactions gained clarity, became more pronounced. A furrowed brow, a slight wince, a suppressed eye roll. It was akin to watching a miniature legal mind dissecting a flawed argument. Finally, Ms. Davies pivoted to the present. "Mr. Maxwell, are you presently employed?" Mark squirmed. "I'm in transition at the moment." But actively pursuing opportunities. Actively pursuing? Ms. Davies arched an eyebrow. Or actively engaged in online poker? Mr. Evans objected again, more vehemently. Your Honor, this is badgering. There is no foundation for that assertion. Sustained. Judge Thompson ruled, yet made a silent note for his clerk to discreetly investigate Mark's online habits. Ms. Davies pressed on, yet the damage had been inflicted. Mark's testimony was a patchwork of inconsistencies, contradictions, and outright falsehoods. Judge Thompson recognized it, Ms. Davies recognized it, and crucially, Leo recognized it. Ronnie's turn arrived. She glided to the stand with poised confidence, her designer attire flawless, her hairstyle pristine. She swore the oath with unwavering resolve. Ronnie offered a carefully cultivated image of stability and accomplishment. She spoke of Leo's learning, his extracurricular involvements, the nurturing atmosphere she fostered. She painted a picture of their opulent home, his fully equipped playroom, his private instructor. It was a vista of privilege and prospects. Yet, as she testified, Judge Thompson discerned a different sort of reaction from Leo. Not the subtle critiques he had aimed at his father, but something distinct, a quiet acceptance, a glimmer of sadness. Ronnie's legal representative, a suave gentleman named Mr. Sterling, extolled Ronnie's commitment to Leo's intellectual growth. Ms. Carter is dedicated to furnishing Leo with every advantage, every opportunity to realize his full potential. He presented scholastic records, awards, and certificates, all proof of Leo's academic prowess. It was an impressive exhibition, yet Judge Thompson couldn't dispel the feeling that something vital was absent. Mr. Sterling then launched into a denouncement of Mark, emphasizing his financial shortcomings, his questionable judgment, and his inability to afford Leo the same degree of care and opportunities as Ronnie. It was a calculated assault, designed to brand Mark as an unfit parent. Again, Judge Thompson observed Leo. This time, no head shaking, no grimacing. Just a vacant stare, a perplexing lack of emotional response. It was as though he were detached, observing the proceedings from afar, a keen observer who recognized the flaws in Ronnie's legal tactic. Finally, Mr. Sterling concluded his case, confident in having presented a convincing argument for Ronnie's sole custody. Judge Thompson regarded Leo anew, searching for a signal, a clue. The boy remained impassive, his countenance inscrutable. As the hearing recessed for the day, Judge Thompson felt a rising disquiet. He was meant to evaluate the evidence, discern the truth, and render a verdict in Leo's best interests. But what if the individual who genuinely grasped the nuances of the trial, the gaps in the arguments, the concealed motives, was the 4-year-old seated silently in the courtroom? The whispered correction. Ronnie, an image of poised elegance in her tailored navy suit, was outlining the divorce settlement. Her attorney, Ms. Abernathy, whose practiced smile never quite reached the corners of her eyes, guided her through a meticulous recitation of the agreed-upon terms. Ronnie's voice, smooth and confident, provided a sharp contrast to Mark's nervous stumbles. Concerning the financial arrangement, as detailed in Clause 7, subsection B, paragraph 3, the agreement stipulates primary ownership of the Carter Investments portfolio to me, with Mark retaining. Ronnie paused, glancing at a meticulously organized file. A 10% stake, contingent on a buyout option available within a 5-year window. Judge Thompson, perched on his elevated seat, listened with keen attention. He registered the subtle set of Ronnie's jaw, the barely perceptible tension radiating from her shoulders. This wasn't merely a legal formality for her, it was a contest for dominance, a factor he consciously guarded against letting sway his impartiality. Ronnie continued, "This provision ensures my continued financial security, enabling me to provide Leo with the optimal environment for his development." She delivered this final remark with a pointed glance aimed at Mark, who squirmed visibly in his chair. A small voice, barely a breath, sliced through the sterile courtroom atmosphere. "That's not correct." Every head swiveled toward Leo, seated quietly beside Ms. Abernathy, his small legs swinging in the large chair. He hadn't shouted, hadn't created a disturbance, yet the simple declaration hung in the air like a discordant note. Visibly irked, Ms. Abernathy leaned towards Leo, her smile faltering. "Now, Leo dear, we're listening to your mother discuss crucial matters. Why don't you amuse yourself with your coloring book?" She patted his leg with a dismissive gesture. Leo, however, remained unmoved. His gaze remained locked on his mother. He leaned closer to Miss Abernathy and, in a whisper so delicate it nearly escaped Judge Thompson's notice, said, "Clause 7, subsection B, paragraph 3 says the buyout option is for either of them, not just Mommy." Ms. Abernathy's composure wavered. She straightened, her expression a blend of annoyance and impatience. "He's simply echoing snippets he's picked up, Your Honor. Children often do." She dismissed it with a wave, as if shooing away an insect. Judge Thompson, however, had absorbed the nuances. He'd witnessed the fleeting spark of genuine bewilderment in Ronnie's eyes, the nearly invisible hesitation before she'd resumed her practiced delivery. And he'd heard Leo's hushed correction, spoken with the unwavering conviction of someone stating a fundamental truth. "Ms. Abernathy," Judge Thompson stated, his tone even yet resolute, "it might be advantageous to revisit the pertinent clause." Ms. Abernathy's back stiffened. "Your Honor, rest assured I possess complete familiarity with the stipulations of the divorce agreement." "Nevertheless," Judge Thompson pressed, "I would appreciate your indulgence." He recognized he was testing the boundaries of protocol, but instinct told him its importance. With a sigh barely masking her frustration, Ms. Abernathy extracted a substantial document from her briefcase and navigated to the relevant section. She scrutinized the text, a slight frown appearing on her brow. The courtroom was holding its collective breath. At last, she lifted her gaze, her face a carefully constructed mask of control. "Your Honor," she admitted, her voice strained, "it appears there has been a slight misinterpretation. Clause 7, subsection B, paragraph 3, does indeed specify that the buyout option is available to either party, not solely Ms. Carter." A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Mark Maxwell appeared momentarily stunned, followed by a spark of something akin to hope illuminating his features. Ronnie's expression remained enigmatic, a carefully erected barrier of indifference. Judge Thompson turned his attention to Leo, now coloring quietly in his book, seemingly unaffected by the commotion he had triggered. The child's face was tranquil, almost detached. He wasn't seeking accolades, wasn't basking in the limelight of his revelation. He had simply presented a fact, as naturally as drawing breath. A strange blend of awe and unease settled over the judge. This was not the behavior of an average 4-year-old. This was something more profound. The realization bolstered the growing conviction that Leo possessed an extraordinary intellect, a cognitive capacity capable of grasping complexities far exceeding his age. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ms. Abernathy. Let the correction be noted in the record." He paused, his gaze lingering on Leo. "Perhaps," he added, with a touch of dry humor, "we should consider adding young Master Maxwell to your legal team." A scattering of nervous laughter eased the tension in the courtroom. Ms. Abernathy offered a tight smile, but Judge Thompson detected a flicker of something else in her eyes, a glimmer of recognition, perhaps, or even apprehension. He directed his attention back to Ronnie. "Ms. Carter, could you please resume your testimony, focusing on the rationale behind your belief that you are best positioned to serve as Leo's primary guardian?" Ronnie, visibly rattled yet still composed, resumed her testimony, but the atmosphere in the courtroom had undergone a transformation. The claws incident had cracked her meticulously crafted facade, revealing a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability beneath the polished veneer. And it had solidified Judge Thompson's belief that Leo held the key to unlocking the truth in this case, a truth shrouded in legal complexity and parental gamesmanship. As Ronnie spoke, Judge Thompson found himself less preoccupied with her words and more with the small, silent presence of Leo. He observed the child's hand glide across the page, imbuing the coloring book with vibrant shades, oblivious to the legal wrangling unfolding around him. Was Leo aware of the ramifications of his correction? Did he grasp the implications of the clause, the potential financial consequences? Or was it simply a matter of mindless repetition, a parroting of phrases he had overheard? Judge Thompson remained uncertain, but he knew one thing with certainty. he couldn't afford to underestimate Leo. He had to discover a way to access that exceptional mind, to comprehend the world through the child's perspective. The destiny of this young boy, he recognized, might very well hinge on it. And the weight of that responsibility settled heavily upon his shoulders. A legal prodigy. The gavel felt heavy in Judge Thompson's hand as he adjourned the session. The echoing silence of the courtroom amplified the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. Leo. That small boy, perched on the edge of his seat, correcting Ronnie with the precision of a seasoned lawyer. It was unsettling, extraordinary. He leaned back in his leather chair, the scent of old books and polished wood filling his nostrils. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but failing to brighten the shadows in his mind. A legal prodigy? The thought seemed absurd, ripped from the pages of a dime store novel. And yet, the memory of Leo's calm, matter-of-fact correction was undeniable. He had reeled off the specifics of Clause 3, subsection B, regarding the deferred stock options like he was reciting the alphabet. Thompson ran a hand over his face, the stubble scratching his palm. He'd witnessed a lot in his years on the bench: deceit, desperation, the ugly unraveling of love. But he'd never encountered anything quite like this. He reached for his coffee, now cold and bitter, and took a small sip. The taste mirrored the unease settling in his stomach. He glanced at the file on his desk, thick with depositions, financial statements, and psychological evaluations. All the usual weapons of a bitter custody battle. But now, there was a new, unpredictable element: Leo. A walking, talking legal encyclopedia trapped inside a child's body. The ethical implications were a minefield. Could he, in good conscience, rely on a 4-year-old's legal acumen to determine the outcome of this case? It felt exploitative. Like turning a child into a pawn in a grown-up game. He imagined Leo, years from now, resenting him, resenting the system for thrusting him into this role. The thought was deeply unsettling. But what was the alternative? To ignore what he'd seen, to pretend that Leo's knowledge was irrelevant? That felt equally wrong. Especially if Ronnie was, as Leo's interruption suggested, deliberately manipulating the financial agreement. The child's future, his well-being, might depend on uncovering the truth. He swiveled in his chair, gazing out the window at the bustling city below. Horns blared, sirens wailed, a symphony of urban chaos. And in the midst of it all, a small boy held the key to a complex legal puzzle. It was almost comical. He considered his options. He could bring it up directly with the parents, but that risked triggering a volatile reaction. Ronnie, especially, seemed prone to emotional outbursts, and confronting them might only drive the truth further underground. He could appoint a guardian ad litem, an attorney to represent Leo's best interests. But would a guardian be able to discern the nuances of Leo's knowledge, to understand the subtle cues that revealed his understanding? He needed an expert, someone who could assess Leo's cognitive abilities without alarming him or his parents. A child psychologist, perhaps, with experience in gifted children. Someone who could help him understand the full extent of Leo's potential, and how to navigate this unprecedented situation. The decision made, a sliver of tension eased from his shoulders. He picked up his phone and dialed Dr. Eleanor Vance. He'd known her for years. She was a brilliant child psychologist. "Eleanor," he began, "I have a unique situation. I need your expertise. And I need it to be discreet." Later that afternoon, after explaining the unusual circumstances of the Maxwell case to Dr. Vance in his chambers, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. Eleanor had listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She'd asked insightful questions, probing for details, assessing his observations with a keen eye. "It's certainly unusual, Thomas," she'd said, her voice thoughtful. "A child exhibiting that level of legal understanding at that age is exceptionally rare. But it's not impossible. There are cases of children with astonishing cognitive abilities, specific knowledge that seems almost innate." She'd agreed to meet with Leo, to conduct a series of assessments designed to gauge his intellectual capacity and emotional maturity. "But we have to be careful," she'd cautioned. "We don't want to alarm him, to make him feel like he's being tested or judged. And we certainly don't want to put any undue pressure on him. Thompson understood. Leo was a child, first and foremost. His well-being had to be the priority. He thought of his own children, now grown, and the simple joy of their childhoods. He couldn't imagine subjecting them to the pressures of a courtroom, the weight of a legal battle. He hung up his coat, the tweed ruff against his skin. He walked out of the courthouse, the evening air cool and crisp against his face. The city lights twinkled like fallen stars, a reminder of the vastness of the world, the complexities of human nature. He knew that the road ahead would be challenging, fraught with ethical dilemmas and legal complexities. But he was determined to navigate it, to find a way to ensure that Leo's future was secure, that his extraordinary gifts were nurtured, not exploited. He had a feeling this case would change him, challenge his perceptions, and force him to confront the very essence of justice. And somehow, that prospect, despite its daunting nature, filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The weight of the gavel still lingered in his hand, but now, it felt less like a burden, more like a symbol of the responsibility he carried, the duty to protect the innocent, to seek the truth, even when it hid in the most unexpected of places. The psychologist's counsel. Judge Thompson felt a disquieting prickle in his gut as he parked his sedan a block from Dr. Eleanor Vance's office. Its unassuming facade, nestled between a bakery and a used bookstore, spoke of deliberate discretion. He'd requested this meeting, insisting on absolute secrecy. The legal community couldn't get wind of his unorthodox thinking regarding the Maxwell case. Inside, Dr. Vance's waiting room offered a sanctuary of soft blues and greens. A quiet melody drifted through the air, a world apart from the courthouse's cold formality. He picked up a National Geographic, but the vibrant photos of distant lands swam before his eyes, his mind elsewhere. When Dr. Vance appeared, she was a portrait of contrasts. Her welcoming smile and compassionate gaze put him at ease, yet a glint of sharp intelligence shone through. Dressed in a simple cream-colored sweater and well-tailored slacks, she projected an air of quiet authority. "Judge Thompson," she greeted, extending a steady hand. "Thank you for coming in. Please join me." Her office felt surprisingly intimate. Bookshelves brimming with texts on child psychology, developmental neurology, and even cherished classics lined the walls. A whimsical mobile of planets spun gently overhead, painting shifting patterns of light. "So," Dr. Vance began, settling into an armchair. "You mentioned a rather unique situation you wished to discuss?" Thompson inhaled deeply. "It concerns a custody battle," he began, choosing his words with care. "And a child, a truly remarkable child." He detailed the situation, careful to excise Leo's name and any identifying markers. He spoke of a boy with an uncanny grasp of legal concepts, his comprehension of complex clauses and arguments far surpassing his years. He recounted the boy's insightful observations, subtle reactions to courtroom drama, and almost unsettling awareness of the proceedings. Dr. Vance listened intently, a slight frown etching her brow. Now and then, she offered a gentle "and," prompting him forward. When Thompson concluded, a profound silence settled over the room. Dr. Vance tented her fingers thoughtfully, her gaze fixed on the planetary mobile. "Exceptionally gifted children," she finally stated, her voice calm and deliberate, "are often misunderstood. Their minds function differently. They process information at lightning speed, drawing connections others overlook, and frequently possess an amplified sense of justice. But this feels different," Thompson countered. "It's more than just precocity. He understands the very core of legal language. He anticipates arguments. It's as if he's been studying law for years." Dr. Vance offered a wistful smile. "Sometimes, such talents manifest in unexpected ways. Perhaps exposure to legal discussions, or simply an innate gift for logical thought. The true concern isn't the gift itself, Judge, but how it's nurtured, or, more often, how it's smothered." She continued, outlining the potential dangers of showcasing a child's extraordinary abilities. The pressure to excel, the specter of exploitation, the isolating effects of being different, all were genuine and considerable worries. "What am I to do?" Thompson asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "I can't dismiss what I've witnessed. His future, his well-being, hangs in the balance. But I can't call him to the stand and quiz him on contract law. It would be unthinkable." Dr. Vance leaned forward, her eyes meeting his squarely. "We must find a way to let his aptitudes speak for themselves, without direct exposure. A subtle demonstration, perhaps. Something that allows him to reveal his understanding without forcing him into the glare of the spotlight." She paused, considering. "Imagine a carefully orchestrated scenario. A hypothetical situation, related to the case. Pose a question, but not directly to him, but within earshot. Frame it in a way that encourages a particular response, one that only someone with his insight could provide. Observe his reactions. His posture, his expressions, any telltale signs of comprehension." Thompson's brow creased. "That's manipulating the situation, isn't it?" "Perhaps," Dr. Vance conceded. "Yet sometimes, a touch of careful guidance is necessary to safeguard those who need it. You aren't seeking to deceive him, Judge. You're attempting to craft a space where his truth can emerge, safely and naturally. The aim is to observe, not to cross-examine." She continued. "Remember, bright children often crave intellectual stimulation. They blossom when challenged. If you present him with a problem that intrigues his mind, he'll naturally want to engage. Frame it as a game, an intellectual adventure, not a formal legal grilling." Thompson felt a spark of hope ignite within him. The notion was unconventional, even dicey, yet it offered a path forward. He could devise a hypothetical scenario, a miniature legal riddle, and gauge Leo's response. It wouldn't constitute irrefutable proof, but it could lend valuable credence to his abilities, possibly swaying the case's outcome. "Thank you, Dr. Vance," Thompson said, standing. "You've offered a great deal to think about. Remember, Judge," she said, her voice gentle yet firm, "the child's welfare must always be paramount. His gift is remarkable, but it's also a weight. Your task is to shield him from that burden, to ensure that his potential is nurtured, not exploited." As he walked to his car, Thompson felt a renewed sense of purpose, tempered by a profound sense of responsibility. A plan, unconventional and fraught with risk, had taken shape. Now, he had to carefully bring it to life without endangering the very child he sought to protect. The legal tangle, it seemed, extended far beyond the courtroom's walls, morphing into a dilemma of ethics, morality, and the heavy burden of protecting innocence. Toys as testimony. The morning of the hearing crackled with a nervous energy. Judge Thompson, fortified by strong coffee and a restless night, felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the responsibility of shaping a young life. Veronica Carter was first to testify. She presented well, articulate and composed, a stark contrast to the anxious energy he'd sensed in their previous meeting. "Ms. Carter," Judge Thompson began, his voice a carefully calibrated blend of formality and warmth. "Can you elaborate on your understanding of co-parenting and how you envision it working with Mr. Maxwell?" Ronnie launched into a well-rehearsed speech about shared responsibilities, open communication, and prioritizing Leo's needs. It sounded good, almost too good. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Leo, who sat quietly beside his mother, clutching a small, worn teddy bear. He was positioned so that he could freely access his backpack on the floor next to him, which he had been told was for his toys. "Now, Ms. Carter," the judge continued, subtly shifting his line of questioning. "Let's say, hypothetically, that a significant medical decision needs to be made for Leo. And let's say, again hypothetically, that you and Mr. Maxwell have differing opinions on the best course of treatment. How would you navigate that situation?" Ronnie paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Well, of course, I would consult with the best specialists available. I would gather all the necessary information and present a well-reasoned argument to Mr. Maxwell. Ultimately, I believe my judgment is sound, and I would advocate strongly for what I believe is in Leo's best interest." As she spoke, Leo reached into his backpack. He pulled out a small wooden block and placed it deliberately on the table in front of him. Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed. He continued his questioning, keeping his voice even. And what if Mr. Maxwell remained unconvinced? What if he sought a second opinion that contradicted your own? Ronnie's jaw tightened. Then I suppose we would have to seek mediation. Or, if necessary, involve the court. But I am confident that my position would be validated. Leo added another block to the table, carefully positioning it a short distance from the first. He then selected 2 miniature plastic dinosaurs, a Tyrannosaurus rex and a Triceratops, and placed them on either side of the second block. No one else seemed to notice. Ronnie continued her testimony, unaware that her son was providing a silent, 3-dimensional commentary on her words. Next, it was David Maxwell's turn. He seemed more nervous than Ronnie, fidgeting in his chair and avoiding eye contact. Judge Thompson repeated the hypothetical scenario, watching Leo intently. Mr. Maxwell, what would you do if you and Ms. Carter disagreed on a crucial medical decision for Leo? David stammered. I guess I would try to talk to her. See her point of view. I mean, it's about Leo, right? So we'd have to put him first. Leo pulled out a small, plush ball and placed it directly between the 2 dinosaurs. And if you couldn't reach an agreement? Judge Thompson pressed. David sighed. I don't know. I guess whatever's best for Leo. Maybe we'd have to let the doctor decide. Or the court. Leo then carefully placed a small toy ambulance next to the plush ball. Judge Thompson felt a surge of adrenaline. He glanced at the court reporter, who was dutifully recording the proceedings, oblivious to the tableau unfolding on the table. The lawyers, too, were engrossed in their notes, seemingly immune to the subtle drama playing out before them. Only he, it seemed, was privy to Leo's silent language. He decided to push further, venturing into even more complex legal territory. Let's consider another hypothetical situation, he said, addressing both parents. Imagine that Leo had inherited a sum of money. How would you ensure that the money was managed responsibly and used solely for his benefit? Ronnie answered first, outlining a detailed plan involving trusts, investment advisors, and strict accounting procedures. With each element of her response, Leo added another object to his arrangement, a small toy bank, a miniature briefcase, and a tiny plastic calculator. David, on the other hand, seemed overwhelmed by the hypothetical. He mumbled something about putting the money in a savings account and using it for Leo's college education. Leo simply placed a single, shiny penny next to the toy bank. The arrangement on the table was now a chaotic jumble of toys, seemingly random to the untrained eye. But to Judge Thompson, it was a complex diagram, a visual representation of the legal arguments, the potential conflicts, and the underlying motivations of the parents. Finally, Ronnie's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, noticed Leo was playing at the table. He seemed irritated. "Your Honor," he said, his voice laced with condescension, "with all due respect, I find this display distracting. Perhaps we could ask the child to refrain from playing with his toys during the testimony?" Judge Thompson hesitated. He wanted to see how far Leo would take this. "Mr. Harrison," he said smoothly, "I believe Leo is simply entertaining himself during what must seem to him a rather tedious process. I don't think it's disruptive." "But Your Honor," Mr. Harrison started. "That will be all, Mr. Harrison." Ronnie looked at Leo, then back at the judge. She seemed to be trying to decipher the arrangement of toys, but her expression was one of confusion. "He's just being a kid, Your Honor," she said with a dismissive shrug. "He likes to build things." David nodded in agreement. "Yeah, he's always playing with his toys. It's nothing unusual." Judge Thompson offered a tight smile. "Indeed. Children often express themselves through play. Sometimes, we can even learn something from it." As the hearing adjourned for lunch, Judge Thompson remained on the bench, staring at the toys on the table. They were more than just playthings. They were a window into Leo's extraordinary mind. He knew, with a growing certainty, that he was dealing with something far beyond a simple custody dispute. He was dealing with a child whose understanding of the world defied all expectations, a child who needed to be protected, not just from the potential failings of his parents, but from the very real possibility of exploitation. He had to figure out a way to unravel the truth without exposing Leo to the harsh glare of the spotlight. The toys were just the beginning. Unveiling the truth. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, the sound a seismic shift in the suddenly silent courtroom. Veronica Carter, perched precariously on her seat's edge, scowled, her impeccably shaped brows knitting together like storm clouds gathering. Across the aisle, Mark Maxwell mirrored her disquiet, his customary self-assurance frayed into nervous adjustments of his tie. "Before we proceed further," the judge announced, his gaze a slow, deliberate sweep. "A rather crucial piece of evidence, it seems, has been overlooked." A beat of silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken questions. "I speak, of course, of the carefully orchestrated tableaux vivant Master Leo presented during the testimonies." Ronnie emitted a soft huff of disbelief. "Your Honor, with all due respect, those are toys. Child's playthings. Surely they aren't admissible as evidence." "Under normal circumstances, Ms. Carter," Judge Thompson countered, a glint of amusement dancing in his eyes, "I would wholeheartedly concur. However, I posit that Master Leo is communicating on a plane beyond mere words, a language that, if deciphered, offers profound insights into his understanding of this entire predicament." He inclined his head toward the stenographer. "Let the record reflect my specific reference to the placement of the building blocks, the strategic deployment of the toy menagerie, the overall schematic composition of these toys as presented by Master Leo following each parental narrative." He refocused on Ronnie. "Following your testimony, Ms. Carter, Master Leo positioned a substantial, scarlet building block squarely before the toy lion, then purposefully toppled it. Care to venture a guess as to the significance of that action?" Ronnie hesitated, her expression a mask of concentration. I honestly don't know. Perhaps he was merely restless? Unamused? A possibility, Judge Thompson conceded. Or perhaps, that crimson edifice symbolizes your narrative regarding arduous working hours and the perceived struggle in balancing career aspirations with parental obligations. The lion, presumptively representing yourself, Ms. Carter. The toppling act suggesting an underlying fragility, an inherent instability within your stated position. A low murmur cascaded through the gallery. Ronnie visibly blanched, her usual composure fracturing for a fleeting moment. The judge pressed on, his voice gaining in resonance. After Mr. Maxwell's testimony, Master Leo arrayed 3 miniature vehicles in linear formation, facing away from a diminutive, crafted house. He then crowned the house with a lone, citron block. Mr. Maxwell, any illumination you might offer? Mark shifted, discomfort radiating from him. Your Honor, frankly, I haven't a clue. Kids engage with toys. It's what children do. Is it truly? Judge Thompson challenged, a thread of skepticism woven into his tone. Or is it conceivable that Master Leo is conveying a far deeper truth? The trio of cars, conceivably mirroring Mr. Maxwell's frequent business sojourns, veering away from the family's epicenter. The solitary yellow block perched atop, perhaps a representation of the financial foundation Mr. Maxwell asserts to provide, yet simultaneously embodying isolation, a detachment from the overarching arrangement. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed and unwavering. Mr. Maxwell, during your deposition, you underscored your fiscal contributions to Leo's welfare. But did you, perhaps, gloss over the protracted durations you spend distant from the domestic sphere? Did you adequately address the potential emotional vacuum your absence might engender? Mark stammered. I provide for him. I ensure he has every conceivable need met. Materially, without question. Judge Thompson responded, his tone gentler now. But what of the emotional landscape? What of those immeasurable needs that transcend mere monetary exchange? He pivoted to address the assembly. This is not to imply willful deception on the part of either parent. However, it underscores the inherent limitations endemic to verbal testimony. Words can be judiciously tailored, selectively presented, and frequently manipulated to project a predetermined image. But the untarnished expression of a child, their unadulterated depiction of reality, resides on an entirely different plane. He lifted a small, time-worn teddy bear from the table where Leo had placed it. This bear. Upon the conclusion of both testimonies, Leo positioned this bear facing toward the bench, that is, toward myself. It was cradling a cerulean block. He paused for dramatic effect. The blue block, according to our established color schematic, signifies trust, comprehension, and security. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, every gaze riveted on the judge. Ronnie stared at Leo, who remained a quiet observer in his seat. Mark appeared increasingly discombobulated, his prepared responses deserting him. Judge Thompson continued, "It is my considered interpretation that Master Leo yearns for a figure of trust. Someone capable of comprehending his inner world. Someone who shall provide a haven of security and stability within which he can flourish." He gently placed the bear back on the table. "Therefore, I propose a brief recess. I wish both parents to contemplate what Master Leo has conveyed to us. Consider the possibility that he possesses an acuity far surpassing his tender years. And contemplate, above all else, what truly constitutes the paramount interest of this remarkable child." He struck his gavel, the sound reverberating through the captivated silence. Court is recessed. As the courtroom gradually emptied, Judge Thompson lingered on the bench, his gaze meeting Leo's. The boy returned the look, an indecipherable emotion flickering in his youthful eyes. The judge harbored a certainty that defied logic, that this was merely the prelude. The unveiling of the truth had scarcely begun, and the path ahead promised to be anything but straightforward. He sensed Leo's singular perspective would be crucial in navigating the complexities of the case and securing the young boy's well-being. He was likewise aware that his unorthodox methodology had raised questions, but he stood ready to defend his choices if it meant safeguarding Leo. This had transcended a simple custody dispute. It had become a quest for true justice, guided by the unspoken wisdom of a child. A future for Leo. The stillness of recess, thick save for the city's distant thrum, cloaked the courthouse. In his chambers, Judge Thompson felt the weight of the case, the abandoned toys and the courtroom a mute accusation. Exposing Ronnie and Mark so bluntly hadn't been his intention, but Leo deserved more than a simple division of time, a future sculpted to nurture his exceptional intellect. When court resumed, Ronnie, though her shoulders remained squared, spoke with a subdued tone. "Your Honor," she began, "Mr. Maxwell and I have talked, and we now understand. We hadn't truly seen Leo." Mark nodded, his usual bombast absent. "Those toys, they were a jolt. I was so focused on proving my worth as a dad, I neglected the act of being one." Judge Thompson leaned in, curiosity piqued. "And what decision have you reached?" Ronnie took the lead. "We've agreed on shared custody, but with a crucial element, enrichment. Leo deserves more than a stable home. He needs intellectual engagement. We propose specialized programs, tutors experienced with gifted children, anything to unlock his full potential." Mark chimed in. "We'll both contribute financially, and we'll seek a mediator specializing in the unique needs of gifted children. Someone to guide us through the complexities ahead." A subtle sense of warmth eased the tension etched on Judge Thompson's face. He'd anticipated resistance, perhaps another volley of accusations. Instead, they'd listened. "That is a commendable proposal," he said, choosing his words with care. "However, I have stipulations. These programs, the tutors, they must be vetted by an independent educational psychologist. And," he paused for emphasis, "I require regular reports, detailing not just Leo's academic progress, but his emotional state. I need reassurance he's thriving, making connections, feeling supported." Ronnie and Mark exchanged a glance, a silent dialogue passing between them. "Agreed," Ronnie affirmed. "Absolutely," Mark echoed, sealing their commitment. A flicker of nascent hope ignited within Judge Thompson. He crafted the order himself, meticulously ensuring it captured every detail, adding provisions to shield Leo from undue pressure and prioritize his emotional well-being. He tapped Dr. Albright, a trusted child psychologist, as the independent monitor. Perhaps, just perhaps, he had charted a course toward the future Leo merited. Yet the case had also kindled something within him. He found himself dwelling on other Leos, children whose talents were marginalized, their potential squandered by circumstance, by uncomprehending parents, by a system ill-equipped to serve them. He resolved to take action. He began modestly, using his influence and network to raise awareness about gifted children and the importance of early detection, speaking at local schools and conferring with educators, advocating for specialized curriculum and teacher training. He even penned an op-ed for the local paper, sharing Leo's story, anonymized, of course, and urging increased investment in gifted education. Then came a bolder ambition. He consulted his longtime friend, David, an expert in nonprofit law. Together, they dedicated months to establishing the Leo Maxwell Foundation for Gifted Children. It would offer scholarships, support cutting-edge research, and champion policies that benefited gifted children from all walks of life. Judge Thompson invested a significant portion of his savings, and then convinced fellow community leaders to do the same. The foundation blossomed, a gradual yet tenacious growth. It became a go-to resource for parents, teachers, and legislators. It financed groundbreaking programs in schools and awarded scholarships that empowered gifted children to reach their full potential. Judge Thompson remained a steadfast presence, attending board meetings, meticulously reviewing grant proposals, and guiding young scholars. Years unfurled. Judge Thompson continued his work on the bench, hearing cases, upholding justice, always mindful of Leo. He watched the foundation prosper, a lighthouse of opportunity for talented youngsters statewide. Time etched lines on his face and thinned his hair, but his commitment to justice and the well-being of children remained as vibrant as ever. One brisk autumn morning, as he prepared for the day's proceedings, a young man approached the bench. He was tall, exuded quiet confidence, and possessed keen, intelligent eyes. Judge Thompson scrutinized him, a spark of recognition flickering in his mind. "Your Honor," the young man greeted him, his tone respectful. "My name is Leo Maxwell. I'm uncertain if you recall me." Judge Thompson rose, a genuine smile lighting his face. "Leo," he declared, extending his hand. "Of course I remember you. I often wondered what became of you." Leo clasped his hand warmly. "I'm clerking for Judge Abernathy. I'm also completing my doctorate in constitutional law." Judge Thompson beamed with pride. "I always believed you were destined for remarkable things." Leo paused, meeting the judge's gaze directly. "I wouldn't be where I am today if not for you, Your Honor. You saw something in me that others overlooked. You opened a door, gave me a future." He retrieved a bound copy of his latest law review article from his briefcase. "I wanted to present this to you. It's dedicated to you. For believing when no one else did." Judge Thompson accepted the article, his heart overflowing. He looked at Leo, no longer a boy with a brilliant mind, but a self-assured, accomplished young man. He had played a role in shaping this future, a reward far surpassing any judgment he had delivered. "It's wonderful to see you, Leo," Judge Thompson managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Truly wonderful." Leo smiled. "It's good to be here, Your Honor. And thank you for everything." As Leo turned to depart, Judge Thompson experienced a profound sense of fulfillment. He had strived to do his best, not only as a judge but as a human being. He had recognized a child in need and dared to intervene, to bend the rules, to champion what was right. And in doing so, he had helped build a future, not only for Leo, but for countless other gifted children who would benefit from the foundation he had established. He settled back into his chair, a renewed sense of purpose invigorating him. The day's docket seemed less daunting, the burden on his shoulders lighter. He was, at heart, just a judge doing his job, but occasionally, just occasionally, that was sufficient to alter the world, one child at a time. The cases ahead remained unknown, but he knew, regardless of what transpired, he would think of Leo, a testament that even within the often bleak landscape of the justice system, hope and possibility could take root and flourish. He smiled inwardly, a quiet murmur of, "Well done," echoing in his soul.